Hello, everybody. Welcome to my Deceptions of the Ages News, Encounters USA, and Matthew Heines for Governor special. This is going to be a 1-hour podcast. It will be available on my Encounters USA podcast channel, Deceptions of the Ages News channel on YouTube, as well as my Heines for Governor channel on YouTube. If you haven't checked out these channels, check them out and subscribe if you like them. All right then, so today our topic is Frankenstein 200 years later and the coronavirus. What's the connection? We're going to talk about it in just a minute. Hello, everybody. I'm Matthew Heines and welcoming you back to our special 1-hour podcast and special presentation on the coronavirus, and as well on the connection between the anniversary of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and what we have let out of the bottle now. Now, a lot of people are going to be joining us from our Deceptions of the Ages, Mormons, Freemasons, and Extraterrestrials channel, and that channel is about the subjects or topics of my book, Deceptions of the Ages, Mormons, Freemasons, and Extraterrestrials. And also, people are coming from my Encounters USA channel. I don't know if you can see my t-shirt, but these are available on my Encounters USA channel. And on that channel, we talk about aliens, Bigfoot, and Dogman. So what is the connection between the three? Is it three? Aliens, Bigfoot, Dogman? Yeah, it's three. Oh, it's not, because aliens and extraterrestrials are going to be a mixed set in that equation. So we are going to be talking about aliens a little bit today, but in a larger general sense, I want you to think about, as we're going over the information I'm going to give you today, what is the connection between the coronavirus, the government, and aliens, Bigfoot, extraterrestrials, Mormons, and Freemasons? And at the end of the podcast, I'm going to just pose that question to you again and see if by any chance your answer has changed at all. All right. Now, like most of you, the coronavirus shutdown has really changed life, I guess you would say. For me, I know I haven't been doing my podcast as much as I would like to. Part of that is because about 2 weeks ago, I decided, hey, people are not able to get food. And so wouldn't it be nice to be able to help people to get food and even get a business going from it? And so 2 weeks ago, I started work on a new business venture. It's called Store to You Express. And we're open now for business, but I haven't really gone out and started hitting the pavement, getting clients yet, because I did something to my leg the other day, and I'm still trying to get the business end of this going, and also tie up these loose strings I have with my listeners and viewers on my Encounters USA, Deceptions of the Ages News channel, and my political supporters on my Heines for Governor channel. So today I'm going to kill all the birds with one stone. I'm going to talk about all of these subjects, and the onus is going to be on you to figure out if they have something in common. Now, of course, I hope that you guys are all doing well. I hope that you're safe. I hope this virus hasn't hit you. And if it has, or if your circumstances are changing. Please share with us. Let us know what's going on. Let us know if there's anything that we can do to help you in your time of trouble. Just leave a comment in the description and we will get back to you. If you want to follow my campaign in Washington State, you can follow on Facebook. I haven't done a website yet because I'm not so sure. Well, I guess I should talk to you about this now. When I announced my run for governor, I was charged with assault. I was assaulted months ago in a swimming pool. And I came home and filed a complaint, canceled my membership at the swimming pool. I called the police, called 911, etc. And I never heard anything back from it. And then a couple of months ago, I got a notice that I'm being charged with assault. And I had to go to court, and I have to go to court again. And the only reason that I can see, because I mean, all this stuff happened on video, and you can see this guy coming at me in a swimming pool. And the only reason that I could possibly even fathom them doing this is just because I announced my run for governor. 2 days later, I get a notice in the mail that I'm being charged with assault, and I'm the one who filed the complaint. So anyway, Inslee is going to cancel the quarantine, the lockdown order in time for me to get to court. And my court date, I think, is May 18th or something, but they're going to cancel the lockdown so that Inslee can try to, or they can put me in jail. So I'm not there to run in the election. So that's another thing that's happened because of this coronavirus, is that they are starting to lock up political opponents. Now, Washington State is more Chinese communist run than, well, except for California. But we have the ballot here, and I mean, and I ran in the Senate race, and 4.5 million voters and 3.5 million ballots were never counted. Where did they go? So I'm trying as governor to get rid of the ballot system and put us back on booths. But anyway, I have that going all over my head. So I also have to get ready for this case. I'm opening a business. I'm running for governor. And I am also hot on the trail of Bigfoot, extraterrestrials, aliens, etc. So I have a lot on my plate. And I do apologize if anybody's offended that I seem to be doing this all at once. But at the end, you'll say, aha. Hopefully you'll say, aha. I see as the madness behind his method of trying to put all this stuff together. So let us go ahead and move on down to my list of things that I would like you to consider when you're considering about this coronavirus. Now, the first thing that I want to have you consider is the fact that we talk about the topic of aliens. And so when we talk about the topic of aliens, the first thing we talk about is government denial. And so anybody who's followed any alien topic, anybody who's followed my channel knows that, you know, we're pretty hip to why the government denies things about aliens, Bigfoot or Dogman. It's just because they don't understand it and they are just trying to keep a job. And if they say anything wrong, they'll be laughed at, they'll lose their job, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how our government works. We've all decided that this is no big surprise, and that when the coronavirus comes out and they start lying to us again, well, that's not really something that surprises any of us. But today we're going to be talking about specifically those lies that they're telling us and how they relate to lies of science and back to our aliens, Bigfoot, etc. All right, now the first thing I want to talk to you about is I want you to recall in 2001, Dr. Stephen Greer did the Disclosure Project, and he had all these people together to talk about aliens and people that had seen them, mostly people that were in the military, but people that had been working for the government. So among the people that he had come out and talk about disclosure was a woman named Donna Hare. Now, Donna said that she worked in the photography labs, and she whitewashed or airbrushed any picture that NASA took that had a UFO in it. Now, another thing that Donna Hare said was that she was a friend of Werner von Braun. And Werner von Braun, the German rocket scientist, said that warning her, you have to be careful. First, it's the Soviets are an enemy, and then you're going to have another enemy, and then you're going to have terrorism is going to be an enemy, and then you're going to have an alien invasion. And they're going to do this so that they can basically consolidate the world under one government and scare the hell out of anybody who says that they're not going to be a part of it. And this way they can also scare the hell out of anybody and make sure that they don't fight back and say, oh, you can't do that. It's not in the Constitution. I have my rights. No, they wanted to have an alien invasion so they could have a one world government where everybody is under the thumb of the very rich people, the nerds like Bill Gates and Bezos and these other freaks of nature that somehow just got lucky and figured out how to write or make a code or steal a code or sell books on the internet or whatever. But because these freaks of nature got lucky, somehow these freaks of nature are controlling us. And so that is one of the crazy things about this coronavirus. So that with Donna Hare was the point I'm just trying to make, is that Werner von Braun said there would be an invasion from space. But as we see, the invasion from space no longer necessary. Okay, before we go any farther and we talk about this invasion from space that didn't have to happen. And if you ever went to Disneyland or Disney World, you would know that they had inner space. So maybe instead of, inner space where you got really small and rode around in that car. Funny story, not really funny, but a friend of mine actually got out of that car, and it was in the dark section of inner space at Disneyland. This is years ago, back in the 70s. And we got out of the car and we're just kind of walking in the darkness, and the car behind us, or I, somehow ended up falling down a flight of stairs in the darkness. So not cool, but anyway, that was my experience in inner space. Your experience in inner space is not so good because yours has to deal with a virus that might kill you. So that is how they were able to change from having this fake alien invasion to this coronavirus invasion from outer space to inner space. Now, why was this so necessary? I mean, Ronald Reagan talked about uniting the world under one government. George Bush talked about a one world order, et cetera, et cetera. So why would they be talking about having this now and not at any other time in history? So unfortunately, I just want you to consider there are some things that have changed so drastically in our country that now these things are possible. And these things that have changed are technology. Right now, people are locked into a house with a widescreen television. They have the internet. They can access, talk to, FaceTime, Skype, chat, Zoom, anybody they want to. They can keep up with the latest news. They have access to any information that they want online. Would this have all have been possible when there were black and white TVs or no TV at all? Would that have been possible to tell people, oh, no, you can't leave your house because you might get sick? People wouldn't have any idea what you're even talking about. So at no time in history has this been possible. And one of the reasons it's possible because of technology. Now, another thing I want you to think about is the thing that made this possible was immigration. They have allowed so many people into this country who are terrified of the United States government, most likely because the United States government was bombing the hell out of the country. They left, but a lot of these people are terrified of the government and they don't understand the concept. This is a free nation, and the government and the people in the government don't tell us what to do. We tell them what to do, and if they don't do it, we vote for somebody else. That's what our Constitution is all about, and that's what our country is all about. But people are coming here now, and they think the government is some superpower, some dictatorial thing that can make you say and do whatever they want. And anyway, it's scary, but that's one of the things that made this possible, because had they tried to do this back when I was younger, people would have just given them the finger. I mean, what happened to the 60s and the rebelling and fighting authority? Not anymore. Why is that? Is it because the leftists, the liberals, are now in power, so nobody can fight against them? I don't know. Something to think about. But I think we will all agree that if there was no widescreen TV, no internet, no online this, no phones, no, wide screens in every room, there would be no way people would stay at home. And there'd be no way the government could get people to stay at home without putting them in jail. Of course, they're doing that now. Now, another thing that I want you to think about that is really different about this crisis is that anyone who calls this the China virus, anybody who calls this the China virus, the Wuhan virus, anything to do with China, even though this is where it originated, is immediately shunned and made fun of and called a racist. Why is that? Why are we so worried about what people think about where this virus came from? That's really frightening. And how much control does China actually have in this country? The other thing I want you to think about is what would have happened if this virus had originated in the United States? I mean, they would have been calling for Trump to be assassinated or impeached. People would have been calling for people to go to war with the United States. People would never, ever forgive the United States for this virus. And of course, it would always be called the U.S. virus or whatever city it came from. Captain Trips, maybe. I don't know. But there is no way that what happened with China would have been the same as if this had come from the U.S. So our media is obviously controlled by the Chinese, owned by the Chinese, and the people who are reporting from the media are obviously funded by the Chinese and giving the Chinese side of every story. Now, does the Constitution say that the president can shut down a private business? Well, I suppose so under martial law, but that has not been declared. So does the president have the right to do any of the things that he's done, or does a state governor have the right to do these? Because if you say no, and I say no, then obviously we need to redo the Constitution and redo the state constitutions to take this power away from these chuckleheads. Now, let's look at something called context. And the first thing I want you to look at is the president declared a national emergency over this coronavirus. We have been overrun for at least 20 some years by illegal immigrants. What is the difference between illegal immigrants and the coronavirus? I mean, how many people have been killed by illegal immigrants in the past 20 years compared to the coronavirus? Is anybody calling for an end to illegal immigration? Not one. So you need to ask yourself, why didn't Trump just shut down the government over illegal immigration? Why did he shut it down over the coronavirus? I mean, illegal immigration has killed a lot more people and ruined a lot more lives than the coronavirus. Okay, so something else that you should probably think about is, why are Chinese-owned construction projects, like in Washington State, for example, and probably your state, why are they still going on when even state-funded projects like highways have been shut down? Why do Chinese-funded projects in Washington State, your state, California, get to continue working? Why are they such a valuable commodity? And who's going to live in them? All the people that they plan on them losing their houses? I mean, they're building these people or these buildings so fast. Did they always plan on people losing their houses and needing apartments to live in? Something else to think about. All right, so let's talk again about context. Why are cars, which kill 50,000 a year, tobacco kills millions of Americans a year, alcohol kills thousands, firearms, why are these things not banned? Why is there not a national crisis? Why didn't they shut down the government? Why didn't they send people a bunch of money and put the government in debt to stop these crises? Why are they allowed to kill Americans, but when the coronavirus comes out and kills people that may or may not have been dying anyway, why did we shut down the country over that? So the next thing is kind of related, is that now that people are dying, what we're finding out is that if you die of cancer and they suspect you had coronavirus, you died of coronavirus. Get run over by a car, they can just say you died of coronavirus. They don't even need any evidence now. And there's enough out there on the internet to prove that this is all going on. And a doctor in Minnesota, I believe he's a representative, has been told that when somebody has an ailment that they die from, that you look and try to attribute it to coronavirus. So what does that mean? Well, of course it means that the statistics on the coronavirus are completely skewed, and that more than likely there was no need for them ever to shut down anything for one day. It was all because of a weaselly little freak in a lab coat that we're going to talk about in a second. Now, the last, or not the last thing, but speaking of the weaselly freak in the lab coat, I don't like to talk like this, but this guy's responsible for millions of lives and destroying our country. This little weasel freak in a lab coat is responsible for destroying the United States of America, and nobody knows that yet, but he is. And you have to ask yourself, and I've done a video about this, done a number of videos about this coronavirus, but they're telling you to do everything that will make you the perfect host for the coronavirus. They're telling you stay inside, don't exercise, don't get sun. They're saying nothing about what you should be eating. They're saying nothing about staying healthy. They want you to be a favorable host for this coronavirus. So that's our little weasel freak in the lab coat for you. Now, here's another question for you. Why did Donald Trump trust all of his fortunes, all of the good that he's done as president, to this weaselly little freak who changes his story every time the media says something about him? Why did Donald Trump trust this guy? I mean, he's obviously deep state. He's obviously motivated by people like Obama, the Clintons, et cetera, et cetera. And obviously, he's trying to push the pharmaceutical industry into the limelight, into controlling the United States by scaring the hell out of people and telling everybody, you can't do anything until we come up with a vaccine. Why did Donald Trump ever begin to trust this man? All right. And the last thing that I'd like you to just consider is this, is that when you watch these news stories, you notice how the media treats the deaths from these coronaviruses like a baseball score. I mean, they're excited when they talk about 3,000 people died in New York, and they're excited when they say how many people died in Spain or Italy or China, and they're even more excited when they say, oh, that's Donald Trump's fault. So you really have to wonder how these people could be so morbid, such low lives, that they would take pride in the number of people that have died from this disease. All right. So now let's go back to where we started. And where we started, we started with the subject of Frankenstein. Now, 200 years ago, Mary Shelley wrote the novel Frankenstein. A lot of you may not know what it was like in the world 200 years ago, but first of all, there weren't as many people. There weren't any machines. There were only sailing ships. But there was something that was changing throughout the world. And that was, for the past few hundred years, people called scientists. Well, first of all, they called them philosophers, but later they called them philosophers, and then they called them scientists. They started doing things like measuring the Earth. They started doing things like figuring out the orbit of the Earth around the sun and the diameter of the Earth and the ratio of the Earth to the moon and orbits and on and on. And with the new science came new technology. Now, a lot of people were happy about it. In the 1820s, it was fairly rudimentary. People still used flintlock muskets, but people all look forward to the advances that science was going to bring them soon. But there were a few people that weren't so convinced that science was going to bring them nothing but horror and nightmare. And you can see it in Edward Munch, his painting The Scream, which came out around that time, 1830s. But in the 1820s, you had these people, these romantic poets. They were called the naturalists: Blake, Wordsworth, Shelley. A lot of people that were into art were really lamenting the fact that people were going out and digging up bodies. And this is the inspiration for Frankenstein. They were lamenting the fact that people were trying to figure out what life was. Why couldn't we just take life as something that God gave us, accept it for what it is, don't try to dissect it, take it apart, put it in a jar, boil it, chop it up, see what's in it? They were scared by that. And so when Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein, she was really writing it as a reaction to what she saw as the future. That one day, one of these experiments was going to get out of the lab. And as we've seen, more than ever, that has happened. 200 years later, almost to the day. Of course, Frankenstein came out in 1818, and this came out in 2020. But it is so close to 200 years that it's almost frightening. So Mary Shelley was terrified that Frankenstein would get out of the lab, and Frankenstein is now out of the lab. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was a person who had feelings and actually went and had amazing adventures. We don't know what this thing is that this Frankenstein that they've created and let out of this lab in China. What we do know about this Frankenstein is that there were quite a number of actors from the United States to China that were working on it. We know that it was developed as a weapons virus. So whereas Frankenstein was scientists' offhand pursuit, back then they didn't know anything that the arms industry would take over science and perfect ways to kill other men. And they wouldn't know that until I think Samuel Clemens or Mark Twain wrote The Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court in the late 1800s. But these are the issues that the Mary Shelley was afraid of, and that as we talk about on our podcast on Encounters USA and even on my channel Deceptions of the Ages News, we're constantly dealing with a government that lies to us. Now, why are they lying to us? Well, obviously they're lying to us because they're doing things that they should not be doing. And everything that they've done, in fact, lately, almost everything the government does anymore is labeled black, is considered confidential, and you can't even get freedom of information on it because that's where the government is going. And why are they doing it? Because they're up to no good. And that's one of the reasons, again, I'm running for the governor's office of Washington State, because I think the government has got to stop being up to no good and start being up to some real good. And as corny as that sounds, let us move on. Now, there's something else that, along with what happened 200 years ago, you need to understand about what happened 100 years ago. Now, 200 years ago, there were no machines, et cetera, et cetera. Sailing ships came along 1850s, 1860s, and gasoline engines about the turn of the century, and everything else is history. At the turn of the century, after the First World War, the United States had changed. Suddenly, the American taxpayer was on the hook for wars. The American taxpayer was on the hook for everything the government did, whereas prior to 1913, the American taxpayer did not exist. The government got their taxes from tariffs, and the American taxpayer paid taxes to states, but they didn't pay national taxes. So by 2013, or 1913, they started the Income Tax Act, and then once the American people were on the hook, then they could loan the Europeans money, and they started fighting World War I. So at the end of World War I, Germany, England, etc., they were all in debt, and their industries were shattered. So the United States industries, especially farmers, were making a lot of money selling their stuff overseas. So it was the perfect time until the late 20s. And up until that time, it was prosper, prosper, prosper. The new automobile had come out, telephones had come out, radio had come out. It just seemed like the good times were never going to end, I guess, until Prohibition came around. But then they did. But before they ended, I want you to take a look at the parallels between two people, Donald Trump and Herbert Hoover. Now, if you don't know who Herbert Hoover was, he was elected president in 1926, I believe. And I believe he took office in 27 or 28. I'd have to check that. But Herbert Hoover was a self-made millionaire. And this is back when $1 million, I mean, that's what like the government's budget was $1 million. This guy had a lot of money, not that he'd inherited, but that he had made himself in mining in Australia or New Zealand. So Herbert Hoover is a self-made man and runs for president as a Republican, and he wins. And he is the epitome of what every American wants to be. He is rich. He was poor, but now he's rich, and now he's president of the United States. In fact, the idea that any kid could grow up to be president started with Herbert Hoover. But things did not last. By 1929, certain families decided that enough was enough, and they started selling, and by families I mean Rockefellers, Harrimans, Bushes, Kennedys. you name it, the who's who of who runs the country. Back then, they decided we're going to sell our stock, and they all did so en masse. And so on October 29th, 1929, the stock market crashed. And unlike today, the stock market the results were not immediate. It took a few days, a few weeks before the orders stopped coming, before the factories started shutting down. And then people realized, oh my gosh, we're in trouble. Not like today when it all happened on one day, right? This all happened on one day, and we have to ask ourselves why Donald Trump let this man control him like he did. Because there is no doubt that Donald Trump is the new Herbert Hoover, and I'm sorry to say that. And to show you how bad it was for Hoover, he went from being a national hero, and he almost won election by a landslide. By the time the Depression really got underway, when people were living in tents, they called those Hoovervilles, tent cities. If you pulled your pockets out of your pants to show that you didn't have any money, those were called Hoover flags. If you didn't have anything to eat, that was called a Hoover feast. So Herbert Hoover became the butt of the United States. This man that had been the hero one day was zero a few years later. And why? This is the very important part that you have to understand. Herbert Hoover refused to put the country in debt. People said, well, you can put the country in debt and then pay it off when we have more money. And he refused to do it. He said, if we put the country in debt, somebody's going to have to pay that off. And that will mean we're going to have to pay taxes. And if you take taxes from the common man, he can't buy stuff. And if he can't buy stuff, then we don't have an economy. So he didn't want to borrow. And what happened? The economy got worse. And of course, he lost the election to Franklin Roosevelt. And Franklin Roosevelt had his New Deal, and he spent, and he spent, and he borrowed, and he borrowed. And did he end the New Deal? Of course he didn't. They spent and spent until World War II came about, and then they went and bombed everybody else's factories, and they had no choice to buy our goods. That's the only way FDR got us out of the Depression. But the Democrats will tell you that he did, that somehow the Democrats saved us. But what happened with Trump is that he knew what happened with Herbert Hoover. So the first thing they did was say, when they put America out of work, well, we're going to give America money. And that way, you know, we'll avoid this panic of what happened before. Not panic like I'm worried about the people, panic of Trump's worried about himself. And I don't mean to say that in a negative way, but every president has to lead the country. So Trump, to save the presidency, he says, okay, well, we'll do what Hoover didn't do, and we'll give people money. Well, that's what Roosevelt did with his New Deal. And so right away, they started giving people money. But they didn't know how long this was going to last. And before, when they borrowed money, we weren't in debt. We're already $23 trillion in debt when they started borrowing $2 trillion. So what does that mean? That means that inflation is going to happen or deflation is going to happen, because there's going to be a lot of people who just can't afford anything. So there's going to be a lot of people starving, et cetera, et cetera. So back to Herbert Hoover and Donald Trump. Trump knew what Hoover did wrong, and he tried to correct that. The only thing that Hoover didn't have was he didn't have a rat in a white lab coat telling him things that he knew nothing about and giving him a lot of this medical mumbo jumbo in order to increase the pharmaceutical industry's power in the United States and over the government. All right, so going back to this UFO scare that the government was going to impose on people, the reason that they were going to use the UFO scenario was because they know that two things motivate people more than anything: hunger and fear. Now, they did that War of the Worlds thing in 1938. They saw what fear would do to people and how people would panic. So they didn't want, I mean, they thought, if they did this fake alien invasion, that was the one thing they'd have to deal with. But with the coronavirus, no fear of an invasion. You can't shoot a virus. You can't fight a virus. You can't kick it in the balls. So people are afraid of the virus. There's no way to fight this virus. And then you tell them, oh, well, the only people that can fight the virus are the rats in the lab coats that are going to develop a vaccine that you don't know what's in it, but we're going to have it out. But until then, you have to stay and be a victim of the Chinese and the coronavirus. So, fear and hunger, fear and hunger. Now what we have is fear, but soon, because the government has shut down, because there's nobody picking the food, because the drivers aren't driving, because there's nobody picking food or butchering anything, or et cetera, soon there's going to be no food. So first of all, they used fear. And then they use the fear to create hunger. So this is the world that we have now. We're transitioning, I hopefully not too fast, but this is why I started my Store to You Express business, because we're going to transition from fear very quickly to hunger. Where there's just not enough food. And of course, the first people that will suffer are the people in third world countries and people that were dependent on selling their coffee and their iPhone or whatever. All those people got put out of work, right? And they don't have a stimulus check coming. They are going to be in very bad straits. But everybody, especially in the United States, is just worried about me, right? So our hunger will come, but it's probably not going to come as fast, although the people that are homeless and people that have lost loved ones that provided for them because of the virus, they'll obviously suffer. So now we need to look at the obvious things that have happened that we need to learn from the virus. And the first thing is that we see that the media, which is owned by 6 companies, the first thing they did when Trump tried to stop the virus and to save people's lives was they came out and they called him a racist, right? Now, this racist thing has gotten really out of hand, because if there is somebody sending people, and let's just look at this in context again. If the Taliban had sent people to the United States that were infected with this disease, we would be in Afghanistan, Iraq, we'd be any place that we could find the Taliban. If they had sent people here infected with this virus, it would be called the Taliban virus, the ISIS virus, the Arab virus, Muslim virus, whatever. But no, it wasn't the Muslims. It was the Chinese, who have a lot of money that they kick into our crooked politicians. So that's something that you really have to think about, is what would have happened if this had come from another place? And what would have happened if it had come from the United States? Well, they would have been talking about attacking us. But because we have so many scumbags in this country that are getting paid by the Chinese, it goes all the way up to the governor of Washington State, to our senators, to our congressmen, all on the Chinese payroll. And this is why we are not saying anything about shutting down the Chinese in our country, because that would be racist. And racist just means that there's money somebody's going to make for making that claim. Okay, now another thing that we see is an obvious effect of this is that corporate America was able to eliminate its competition, especially like McDonald's, Burger King, all these multinational corporations. They were able to eliminate mom and pop. Mom and pop are going to starve to death, and they're going to have to work at McDonald's and all of these corporations, which were deemed as essential based on how much money they contribute to political action groups and lobbyists in Washington, D.C. Now, another result of the coronavirus is that banks are going to, instead of, all right, this thing about banks loaning you money and then that loan being forgiven, how many people actually believe that? How many people think that you can take out a loan from a bank and then come back later and that bank is going to forgive that loan without any catch 22s? And how many people are going to be able to come back to that bank and say, I've hired my people back, I'm paying them because we're back in business? Like nobody. And then you think about the mortgages, et cetera, et cetera. Eventually, what's going to happen with this is that the banks are going to go to the government and say, either you take over, you buy all the real estate in the United States, which the government doesn't have the money to do, and be responsible for these people's debt and the crisis that you created, or we're just going to fail. And when we fail, that means no 401ks, the government, the entire country goes into chaos. And anyway, so that's something that you need to think about, is that the government and businesses are just using this as a way to get you into more debt. All right. Another thing that we learned out of all this is that the media doesn't really understand what the president's job is, what his authority is, or even how the Constitution works. Now, how many times have we sat and listened to these idiots that work for like CNN or whoever, and they ask the president if he has authority? Hello, have you heard of eminent domain? Anyway, I went to college with people that were journalism majors, and they had like a minor in English or history or something, but they didn't know anything about anything except how to put on makeup and sit in a chair and read a news broadcast. So anyway, and see, I didn't study journalism. I don't have a teleprompter. I just do this all basically off the top of my head and with a few notes from my laptop. So anyway, yeah, we learned that the people in the media have no idea what's going on. So what that means is that they have no idea what's going to happen. They don't care what's going to happen. They don't care what's going to happen to you. And all they care about is putting forward a narrative that is going to keep you from thinking about anything that will keep you alive over the next few months. What they want you doing is thinking about a lot of stupid issues that don't matter to anybody. Like, what did Trump say? And what did this reporter respond to Trump? You know, that doesn't have anything to do with whether or not you're going to live or die. So, so that's our media. And that is another result of all this, is that we realize that they are just pathetically worthless and not worth wasting your time on if you want to get the truth. All right. So now we're getting down to the, I guess kind of the close of the podcast. And again, I want to tell you guys that I feel for you. During this time, it's been really a shakeup. You know, your whole daily schedules changed, your life changed. Things that were not important before are suddenly important. So everything is getting twisted around. And with me, of course, just having all these things going on, I really just want to thank everybody from all my channels for sticking with, for subscribing, and especially you guys that are supporting me in my governor campaign. I think that's really nice, and leaving comments on my videos and on Facebook and stuff is really nice. It really is nice to know that people are paying attention and that people are really looking for a change. So in these times, I know you guys are sitting there saying you're looking for answers. And the only answer I can give you is I've told you that for 200 years, people have been afraid of science. And they've been afraid, and Mary Shelley used Frankenstein. There was the Wolf Man, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. I mean, Mary Shelley just started the whole genre of science gone crazy. And now, 200 years later, what she envisioned has come about, but it's not a man brought back to life. It is a tiny, tiny microscopic creature that we know nothing about that appears to be mutating and that appears to be very hard to fight. Now, I know people are sitting there telling you that they're going to get a vaccine for this. There's no vaccine for a cold. There's nothing. And so what they're trying to sell you, they're not trying to sell you a vaccine. If you remember from the book of Revelation, they said that in the last days that the mark of the beast would be a chip, that everybody would have to wear the mark of the beast. And everybody thought that it would be this computer chip. Well, of course, we've seen that Bill Gates has come out and said, everybody needs to get this shot, and we're going to be able to tell whether you've had the shot or not. You will not be able to buy or sell unless you have the mark of the beast, or in this case, the mark of Bill Gates. So if you have any question as to where this is going, as to why all this is happening now, I think that the things that we've talked about so far in this podcast really kind of lay that out and answer those questions for you. Now, as I said before, I'm not going to come out and tell you how to think. You got to do that for yourself. I mean, I wrote a 500-page book. You can read this, and this is going to give you a background on what happened up to the time of the coronavirus and Donald Trump's election. But in the end, what I say is not important. It's what you think. And not only what you think, it's what you do. So I really encourage you to educate yourself, not only for you, but for your family, for the people that depend on you. Things are changing, and they're changing fast. They are never going to tell you the truth about what's going on. What we have to do is we have to stick together. So that's what I'm doing. And that's why I started Deceptions of the Ages News. It's why I started Encounters USA. It's why I'm running for governor. Because I can't sit by and not do something about it. Now, I know that I'm going to have to go through this court process, and I don't know what's going to happen. You know what happens to people that go to jail under the Democrats. I might not come out. But I want you guys to know that no matter what happens, I had to do this. I can't sit by and do nothing. I'm an ex-paratrooper. I took a constitutional oath that I would defend the Constitution of the United States and the people of the United States, and I will do that to the cost of my life, and that might be happening very soon. So I just want you to understand why I'm doing these things. And if the worst happens, then just remember that you have to go on, and now it's your turn to make your sacrifice. So this is how it is, and I wish that things were different, but until you vote for me, until we get leaders into office that care about us and not an invasion of our country and not trying to kill us and make as much money as they can off us and treat us as slaves, until we get leaders like me into office, then nothing's going to change, and it only gets worse. And I saw a nice billboard a few months ago, and it said, the future isn't what it was supposed to be, or the future isn't as bright as it was supposed to be. Well, it can be when you make a choice. So again, I want to thank you guys for listening to me. This is a year now for Encounters USA. I think it was about a year ago I started my first podcast on Encounters USA. And I want to thank everybody who stuck with me and subscribed throughout the year. This is also um, a Deceptions of the Ages podcast, or not podcast, but it'll be on my Deceptions of the Ages YouTube channel. And also, this will go on my Heines for Governor as a special 1 hour podcast. So I want to thank you again for your time, your support, your subscriptions, and your comments. I want to thank you all for your friendship. I want you to be careful out there. I want you to realize that this is not the norm, that this can never happen again, that we need to get leaders like myself into office that will write things into the Constitution, that will take away the powers from these science freaks, and that we will give our powers back to the people of the United States. So I'm not a politician. I actually just wanted to be a teacher and a writer, but I guess this is fate. So for Deceptions of the Ages news, we'll see you next time.